Okay, I am not a podium person, just to put that right out there. So I want to say thank you so much for having me. I love partnering with Tufts. I love the Refugees in Towns project. I was so pleased when it was started several years back now. Wow, time flies. So this morning, I'm going to talk about the thing that I love now, which is stories. And I should hope that you've had tea or coffee because this is interactive. So we're going to wake up. It's not just going to be me talking to you all the time because storytelling is about talking. So to that end, I'm going to make sure if you are not sitting next to somebody, you're going to need a partner. So this is that moment where I'm going to have you awkwardly look to your left and right, make sure there's someone that you can tell a story to. No one's going to be asked to come to the front of the room. We have people there for that, but you definitely need a friend. So if you don't have a friend, you got to raise a hand. Do you have a friend? Fantastic. Okay, so Stellar Story Company, what is that? So Stellar Story Company is a company I started a while back, which is all about creating extraordinary stories, hosting unforgettable events, and all in the interest of meaningful change. As Mariana said, one of the programs I do have the privilege of curating is Stories from the Stage, which is on PBS and WORLDChannel. We've won 2 International Webby Awards, which I don't know if you know what a Webby was. I didn't know when we won, but it's kind of awesome. It's like the Oscars of the internet, which was cool. And what I think is great is that we've purposely feature first-time tellers on the program. More than 50% of the people had never told a story before. This is my preview to all of you to say you could be on the TV show. We're always looking for new talent. We film here at GBH Studios in Boston. And for those of you at home, we welcome you to come here as well. To give you a little preview of how today is going to work is it's like 3 sections. The first section, I am going to do a lot of talking at you. The second section, I have 2 fantastic guests who have told stories themselves who are going to talk and share their stories. We're going to see one of the ones recently featured on a television show. And my friend BR is going to be here. He's from Sudan, and he's going to tell you a story live. And I give him major props because he has never told this story before. He's here to tell it for you because we're going to workshop it with him. He's looking for your advice about how to make it better. I've never heard it, but the reason he's doing it today is in 2 weeks, we're recording it for national television. So you guys really have to give great feedback. And then you're going to tell some stories, but only to each other. Like, again, nobody's being brought up front unless you're really brave and you want to at the end. So that's the format for today. And now I just want to spend the only time I'm going to spend the whole 90 minutes getting on a small soapbox. So I studied forced migration at college. I graduated from Clark University in international relations, sure that I was going to spend the next 20 years working in refugee camps, policy departments, changing the world, all through like papers, honestly. I thought I was gonna be a writer. And then my life changed dramatically. And as my mom likes to say, it's all because of my thesis. So I don't know if anybody here is a senior, but you should think really carefully about your thesis, because my thesis paper was about refugee resettlement to Lewiston, Maine, my hometown. But not, if you know anything about Lewiston, the Somali resettlement. It was about the Togolese families, 4 families who came to Lewiston before the Somalis, and how it disrupted the community for 2 years because of a political election where the mayor just happened to be working for the agency that resettled refugees, not even in the refugee department. She was in childcare. But her opponent was like, she likes the foreigners. I'm here for you. So I wrote my papers on how that affected our community, these 4 families. And in my final paragraph of my paper, I said, you know, I fully support refugee resettlement in this country. I think we need to do more of it, but we need to be better. And we need to be better around particularly engaging the receiving communities, the locals, in the process so they feel like it's not suddenly a shift in their community they're not aware of, or they feel like they're bad if they raise any questions. That was May 2001. And then, as I'm going to get to in a moment, there's a bigger story of the Somali resettlement. So back then, that was what I thought I'd be doing. 20 years later, I'm like, what happened? Like, what happened to that research? What happened to working in refugee camps? Well, Lewiston happened first. But what also happened was that I became really invested and interested in the stories that we tell about refugees. And I mean all of us. Refugees who come here, those of us that work with refugees, those of us who marry, become friends with, go to school with. We fundamentally impact how those receiving communities think of new arrivals and their interest in integrating. And in 2008, I had this unbelievable experience of being invited by the Department of Health and Human Services to sit on a task force with 8 other people. And our job was to figure out how to measure refugee integration. Because if you know anything about refugee integration, for 20 years or more, It's all come down to one indicator. Anybody know what it is? The one indicator for refugee resettlement. Not language, somebody else. Good, you're talking, that's good. Employment, yes, it is all about, do refugees have jobs at 90 days or not? Are they in public assistance at 9 months? It's all about money. And so they were like, well, there's a lot of other things to measure integration on, right? So language. What else can we measure integration on? Housing, what else? Education, what else? Health, what else? Connections to locals, yes. Anything else? Think about your life. How would you measure your satisfaction in life? Spiritual, yes. Religious integration. Transportation, do you have access to transportation? Are you safe in your communities? Do you have access to security? Here's the thing, I could go on and on about integration measurements, but there's a long list, and the list usually starts with employment, public assistance, education, healthcare, transportation, security. It's almost always presented this way. But the last integration that hasn't spent nearly enough time on is belonging and community integration. And it's always like that if we have time, like we'll get to that because it's so hard to measure. But here's the thing, after 20 years in this field, if we started with that, if we put it at the top of the list, it would impact whether people get jobs because our employers interested in hiring refugees. Are my teachers being welcoming to my student from Sudan? Do the doctors know how to treat me as a Cambodian refugee or Cambodian immigrant? Like all of these indicators, but we always leave it to the last priority. But for me, what I've decided to spend my life now doing is figuring out, so how do we work on that? And for me, it comes down to in part to storytelling and being really deliberate in building community connections. So that's my little soapbox. So that's why I really want you all to tell great stories. And not just tell them well, but choose good stories to tell. So that's the focus for today. Now, to get to that, I am really bad at clicking. What? Okay, I'm like, I am really clicking well. All right, to get there, the first section I said, I'm going to talk at you. So what I mean by that is I'm going to share you some stories. And there you go. You guys just want to put, okay, so we can skip ahead from that. Keep going from there. Oh, actually, no, that's why I need the clicker. Okay, so before I actually get there, I'm going to do one quick activity I do with all of our workshops. So our stories in life begin from the point that we are born and someone gives us a name. I'm going to have you turn to your neighbor in a second and tell a story about your name. Now, I'm being very specific. I gave you 3 prompts you could choose from, and I encourage the people online to write them in the chat as well if you'd like. It's not what's the meaning of your name, which is what we're usually asked, or who gave you your name. It's a story about your name. And the difference being that there's 3 important elements when you're telling a story. The first one is it needs to be personal about you. Okay, it's our name, check. The second is stories inevitably have conflict. If there's no conflict or problem in a story, you don't have a story, you have an anecdote. Then the third most important thing when you tell a story is there needs to be meaning, some universal connection we all have. So look at these. When were you most proud of your name? What thing happened that made you be like, I am Cheryl Hamilton? Honestly, I don't think I have that one. We don't always have one for every prompt, but I definitely have one for the next 2. When have people treated you differently because of your name, first, middle, or last? And third, when did you wish you had another name? I have many stories, but the one I came to first for me this morning was me and my husband right now. We're in a disagreement about my last name. His family is Iranian or Persian, and you do not, when you get married, take the last name of your partner. But I always thought I would. So I thought I was going to become Cheryl Shirazi last year when I got married. I'm still Cheryl Hamilton. We're still having the conversation because we have 2 cultures disagreeing about what that means and what it means for us as a pair. So that's a quick story. I'm going to take about 5 minutes. Each of you are going to have 2 minutes. Turn to your partner and let's share a story about our names. Again, people at home, feel free to write them in the chat. Okay, boy, that. Oh, that's what you were saying? I was like, what is she saying? I thought you were like, I'll do it. Right. Oh, okay. I can do it. Like, that's fine.
Sure, to give us.
It keeps. Maybe I just point at you. Let's just point. You're like, hey, you. Can you? Can you go back to the names one? Or you think I'm gonna do it now? Okay, never mind. That's so weird. If not, if I do that, it doesn't work, I'll just point at you. About 1 minute. So if you haven't switched, make sure you do, but 1 minute. Maggie, can you call BR, say yes? And tell him that you're with me. And then tell him whatever he's got to do to make that happen. Is that okay? Thanks. All right. As you can imagine, I hate interrupting stories. Hello. I really hate interrupting stories, so I'm so glad to see there's already some connection happening, but we do have a lot of things to get through. We've just found out that our Sudanese is broken down on a highway, but he says he's near a friend's house, so he's going to go there and zoom in. Like, God love him. We're going to make it work. This is so pandemic life. All right, I'm just out of curiosity, who did question number 1? Anybody? You did. Oh, good. Couple. All right. Who did question number 2? And who did number 3? You did all of them. You guys are awesome. Great. It's usually number 2 that gets people, which says a lot about our society and what we have to do to be more understanding, tolerant, and education around names. All right, so I told you the first part of this section, I'm going to talk a lot at you. All right, anybody here from Maine? Really? Where are you from? Oh, I live in. You grew up in Auburn? We should talk. That's where I'm from. Oh. We need to chat. We have lots to talk about. It's the mask, I think. Yes. And then how many people are even familiar with the Somali migration to Maine? All right. So I am going to do the fastest timeline explanation of what happened because I want to get to the stories. But I also think it's not fair for some people to be like, what is this woman talking about? All right. I told you in 2001, I graduated from college, moved back to my parents in Maine. I got a job in West Africa working with refugees. But right before I went, 2 important things happened in my life. Well, important is an odd word to just use there. I'm going to be really transparent because this is storytelling and there's no way to tell the story without including this. But 9/11 occurred. Many of our lives were changed in a very abstract, independent way. It changed for me was after watching people jump out of buildings and all the trauma. I went out one night to a bar to go dancing and I got assaulted on the way home. And I'm spending 2 years going through a rape trial in Maine, which kept me in Maine. But the other thing that kept me in the Maine at the same time was that someone got a hold of my thesis because Somalis started moving to Maine. And they said, didn't you say you could do this better? And I was like, I thought someone could do it better. But when in life do you get a chance to take your thesis and put it directly into action? So I abandoned the plan. I stayed in Maine for 2 years. Nobody knew what was the weird duality going on in my life. Then we have, this is what downtown Lewiston looks like, Lowell, Haverhill, all the mill towns. 9/11 occurs, and one of the untold stories about 9/11 was that many immigrants in this country lost their jobs when manufacturing went overseas at the exact time that housing costs in this country skyrocketed. And for many years, people moved to Lewiston as immigrants because it was a really diverse community with lots of services for refugees and immigrants. But you couldn't get housing in 2001 in Portland anymore unless you had a lot of money. So you drive up 95 and you just keep going. So Somali and other immigrants started moving to Lewiston. And then this crazy thing happened. They kept coming. And one of the reasons that they kept coming was there was really affordable housing. In 2001, you could get a 4 or 5 bedroom apartment for $600 in Lewiston. And there was tons of it because the Catholic families that were my immigrant relatives had big apartments and many of the families had left Lewiston. So there was just a lot of housing happening. Because it was post 9/11 though, the anti-Muslim sentiment in this country, the anti-immigrant sentiment was skyrocketing at the time. And basically, as the media liked to cover Lewiston, we had the Black African Muslims against the white Christian natives. This was the narrative that everybody was looking for, that microcosm story to cover. So media came to Lewiston, but unfortunately, other things made it just a little bit more challenging for us. One of which was Black Hawk Down, the movie the docudrama about the soldiers who died in Mogadishu during the Black Hawk Down operation. It came out this October of 2001 and was the major movie in downtown cinemas in Lewiston. So that did not help. It didn't help also because one of the soldiers who died in Mogadishu was from the neighboring town of Lewiston. So you had extra resentment toward the newcomers. But we were doing our best. We were trying really hard to bring people together. We did things like this. This was the silliest night of my life, I think. I organized this little circle of people to talk to each other. But back then I didn't think about stories. So instead we played trivia. We tried to bond by winning things. Some of it went well, some of it was super awkward. Like when I had people count how many pets they had in their group and if they had more pets in their group than the group next door. This is what you do when you're 22 and you're trying to save the world. I look back now and I'm like, oh my God. But we could have maybe gone under the radar and tried to navigate this with a lot of sensitivity and community support, except we could not stop the media from coming. And a media story broke when Empire Falls movie came out and Richard Russo won the National Book Award. And a reporter from Chicago came to Maine to go to the city where this is based on. But his editor said to him at the time, but while you're in Maine, see if there's something else to write about. He wrote about Lewiston. Within a month, we had every major media outlet in Lewiston nonstop. You could not pay for the amount of press we were getting. At 22, I'm being interviewed for the front page of the New York Times. What do you think it's going to take to change Lewiston? I have no idea. If I knew it, I would do it. They were interviewing like everybody. So even the conversations we should have been having thoughtfully, the uncomfortable conversations, we weren't having them because everyone's afraid they were going to end up in the news as some sort of like talking point. And it offered all kinds of stress. But the other thing it did was that it drew national hate groups to Lewiston. Because if you're looking for headlines, you're looking for the place that you believe is going to support your hate speech and your hate, let's just say hate, you show up in Lewiston. The saddest day for me was when there was crossword puzzles being passed out on the school parking lots that if you completed them, celebrated people like Hitler and the Aryan race. The same schools that I went to as a child. But we had our one day, our many in one day on January 6, 2003, when the hate group, the World Church of the Creator, came to town to protest, and everybody else went to Bates College to protest against the protest. And everybody covered this story, just as much as they covered the story when the mayor wrote the letter that to the Lewiston mayor, the new one that won the election that was anti-immigrant, wrote a letter saying they weren't welcome. Everyone came back to see, is there going to be fights on the streets of Lewiston? Now, there's some interesting backstories to that day. The day before the World Church of the Creator came, the second largest hate group after the KKK, the leader of the World Church Creator, he was arrested for inciting to kill a judge. So he didn't come. And when he doesn't come, a lot less people come. 28 people came from the World Church of the Creator. About 3,000 of us were across town having this rally. So it was a beautiful day. Like, it was beautiful. But it was just one day. And then the media left. And finally, we started getting down to work and trying to build community. But it felt like the amount of media and the types of stories they were telling about Lewiston was actually exasperating the tensions. It made it harder for people to connect. But this is Lewiston today. This is my friend Hussein's shop on Lisbon Street. This is the school system. This photo blows my mind because when I was in school in Lewiston, Auburn, there was less than 5 people of color in my class. 2 of them were twins. Now more than 35% of the school system are children of immigrants or immigrant children. All right, so fast forward, 2003, my trial ends, and I want to get the hell out of Lewiston, not because of the work with Lewiston Auburn, but for my own personal need to leave the place that I was assaulted. So I moved to Baltimore, Maryland, and I got a job running the National Center for Refugee Employment, nobody knowing. The outcome of my trial was the man got a $500 fine. It was a very difficult time in my life. So with some space, I decided I'll try to write about it because I felt like not only my own story, but I felt like the stories being written about Lewiston were so polarizing and so treetops. The day the pigs head went in the mosque, which was awful, the day of the hate groups. But that's not how you build community. No one was writing the complicated, messy story in the middle. So I started to write it. And I took it to publishers and they said to me, I'm sorry, you want to write a book about race, refugees, and rape? No one's going to want to read that. I think now in the Me Too movement, in the era of Trump, people might have read it, but I was getting shut out everywhere until I saw an ad in the paper that said, do you have a story to tell? And it was for a storytelling class. Folks, I was an international relations major. I knew nothing about storytelling or theater, but I signed up. And crazy thing happened. I did a 20-minute piece, as you would in the class. And the director said to me, you should finish that play. And I said, are you crazy? He said, you should finish it. I said, I'm going to Africa because crazy. I ended up going to Africa. I decided that I really wanted that experience to see the circumstances that Somalis lived in and other refugees before they came to the US. So I went and lived in Togo in West Africa with the relatives of those first Togolese that I featured in my thesis. And when I got back to town in Baltimore, I ran into that teacher in a coffee shop. And he said, did you finish the play? And I was like, no, I don't think you understand. I am not a playwright. And he said something that changed my life forever. He says, I will give up 2 nights of my life for the next 6 months if you'll let me direct and write that play with you. And that's what he did. And we did. And we opened in New York City on Broadway. second story walk up Broadway, but it was Broadway in New York. And then I traveled with it for 5 years. And this play is called Checkered Floors. And it's basically the gray that exists in all of our lives and in all of our communities, and trying to find threads of hope and optimism and lessons in it. Well, then I retired the play, actually here in Boston in 2012. I also was still working in refugee resettlement in this country. I worked for Refuge Point here in Cambridge. I worked for the International Institute of New England, resettling refugees. And in 2016, election night, right? I'm actually at a storytelling event by weird coincidence. And I'm seeing the results come in on my phone, and I am gut-wrenched. And that night in my apartment, I fell to the floor when Trump was elected, like many people. And I think that's a very visceral reaction to a presidential return. But for me, it was everything that happened in Lewiston was about to happen in this country. That microcosm of conflict we had about the assaults on some women, all of that was being ignored, and we were just going to move forward as a country with this kind of environment. And I was just devastated. I knew that I was going to have to lay off staff the next day in Lowell. I knew that our clients were going to be afraid, and they were the next day in our office when they were crying, saying, should I be scared? Should I go back to my country? I knew that people were hurting. But I knew something I hadn't known for myself 7 years before, and that is the power of storytelling. So I did this crazy thing. I walked into my CEO's office and I said, so here's the thing. I have an idea. I want to do this Suitcase Stories storytelling event. We're going to invite refugees and immigrants and those of us that care about them to stand on stage and tell some stories. And we weren't even an arts institution. He's like, why would we do this? And I said, because people need to hear these stories, but more importantly, people need to tell them. I wanted to give them the feeling that I got when I walked off stage the first time I told my story, which is that suddenly people come up to you and they're like, I went through that too, you're not alone. Or I never thought of the issue the same way. I once performed the show at a theater in, I think it was like Columbia, Maryland. And it's okay, but they got the date wrong on the poster for the day I was booked. I got there was 6 people, there was supposed to be 300. And I was like, what do I do now? They were like, we're so sorry. Can you stay to tomorrow? And I was like, yeah, but what about these 6 people? And he says, it's up to you. I did my play for the 6 people. And after I finished, the gentleman walked up to me and he said, I brought my son because I want him to know what impact rape and sexual assault has on women. I just want to thank you for telling your story. And I knew if we could give that little bit of joy to immigrants in this area who are feeling targeted, that maybe they'd feel a little better. It was supposed to be 4 shows. That was it, call it good. And I'm really proud that 4 years later, it's a program, full-time program at the International Institute. But for me, I went from a service provider to full-time storytelling because I got to meet people like Renaz and BR, who you're going to meet, and hundreds of others who have bravely stood up and told stories. And on a very personal level, it brought joy and hope back to me during the worst presidential period, right, in our last 20 years. But it also showed me that we have to find the common threads. So what we're going to talk about now is like, how do we do that? What can we do when we choose stories that will actually connect with others? Where's my time? I'm just checking time. Do I leave my phone over there? Oh, that's where I need it. Is he all set? Okay, great. Okay. Since we're waiting for BR, I want to pause before we get to Renaz's story. So we're gonna talk about how everyone in this room has a refugee story. And what I mean by that is that I worked on the marriage equality campaign in Maine. And as you know, in this country, LGBTQ voices need to be front and center first when we come to marriage equality. But marriage equality didn't change the voting until people who are friends of, relatives of, colleagues started speaking up and saying, I support this too. And I feel the same way about refugee support and immigration, which is those of us who are not immigrants, even if we're generationally of immigrants, we need to speak up as well. Okay, doing a lot of talking. It's hard in the mask. I've never had to do this live with mask, so hold on. Okay, I want to give you 8 minutes of my play, and then we're going to switch to Renaz. Because what I just did was gave you the speech that I used to give if I traveled around the country. I gave you all the facts, right? But what I learned from my director is it's not facts that connect with people, it's emotion, right? It's the little moments, it's the little feelings. And so he helped me become a better storyteller, which allows me to help other people do the same. So the piece I'm going to do right now, it's the second scene in the play. I don't think I need to say anything else to set it up, but it's all about that period of my life. And I shall say there's usually a set, there's different chairs. I'm not going to do it like that, but okay. I'm waiting for the voices in Fatuma's apartment because earlier in the day, she called her office to say that someone, okay, can I do this without the mask? This one, I'm like dying. Okay, I was told I couldn't, but thanks. Don't tell anybody. I'm waiting for the voices in Fatuma's apartment, and I can't help but think about all the rumors rolling around Lewiston. Rumors like how the Somalis are given hundreds of dollars upon arrival, or that they all drive Jaguars, even though I've only ever seen used Dodge Caravans and early Honda Civics. Or my favorite, that they have unlimited expense accounts at Walmart and Shop and Save. Now, I know that that's not true because I shop at Walmart. I would prefer it shop at Target, but they don't have one in my town yet. But when I am at Walmart, the Somalis line up in line just like I do. They pay just like I do. Well, except for that one time. Oh my God, what are you doing? The Somali woman in front of me is handing a blank check to the cashier, an actual blank check. And I want to tell her to stop because like, what is she doing? And then I realize, oh, she can't write the English words on the line and she's trusting the cashier behind her to do it for her correctly. And I don't know why I'm worried. I mean, I think Mainers are pretty kind and honest, but well, I'm worried. I'm worried because it's January 2002 and already over 500 Somali immigrants have moved into my hometown. And maybe a migration like this wouldn't be a big deal if this was Detroit or Dallas, but this is Maine, the second whitest country in Vermont after Vermont. And Lewiston, it's not Portland or Bar Harbor. It's not the vacation land. I mean, most people drive through Lewiston to get to the vacation land. I think there's like 12 gas stations on Lisbon Street alone. Lewiston is an old mill town trying to redefine itself after the shoe and blanket factory shut down. It's a college town where most of the residents can't afford the college. It's where Muhammad Ali won a prize fight in 1965, but where the name Muhammad, it hasn't been heard of since. Practically everyone in town is Catholic or at least Christian. My aunts and uncles are Mary, Johns and James. It's a city where high school students dream of leaving to the big city of Boston, and it is not where I wanted to be after college. I was supposed to go to Africa, but as my mom likes to say, Africa came to me. I mean, Somalia. Well, 2,000 Somali immigrants moved into my small town. Waiting for the voices in Fatuma's apartment, I start to feel a little ashamed. You see, I live in this beautiful 3-story brick house with big picture windows and cathedral ceilings. At the holidays, we have a Christmas tree that's 20 feet tall and uses 16 strands of lights. I know people in town think we have money, but we honestly don't. My dad just bought the house for cheap and we've been doing all the work ourselves. All right, well, I didn't do any of the work. I was like 2, but I am told that my babysitter nailed in every baseboard. And if we're telling the truth, even though I've spent the last 10 years traveling around the United States telling refugee service providers nationwide that I'm from Lewiston, you know, the city that was invaded by Somalis according to national hate groups, the city where the mayor wrote the infamous letter that ended with the line, "Please tell the Somali community we are maxed out, financially, physically, and emotionally maxed out." That city, it's not true. I'm actually from Auburn. And although Auburn is the city across the river, it's also true that Lewiston has the mills and Auburn has the golf courses. Waiting for the voices in Fatuma's apartment, I start to look around and all I see is a used table with a faux wood finish and a rug on the ground that's the kind my grandmother would have donated to Goodwill, and a 6-inch thick thick mattress that it must be where Fatuma and her daughter sleep together at night. And this makes me think about my mother, who used to be a teacher in Lewiston. She used to tell us about going down to Knox Street to visit the parents of her students. She never had to tell us about starving kids in Africa. She told us about the students that came to her classroom in the morning hungry. Fatuma lives on Knox Street. She says she is scared and wants to know if you can come and be her witness. I'm waiting for the voices in Fatuma's apartment because earlier in the day, she called the office and with the help of an interpreter said that people were yelling obscenities through her door at night and she was frightened. She wondered if I could come and just sit and wait with her to wait for the voices. And honestly, I did not have time. There were 4 more Somali families in the waiting room and 4 more at the bus to pick up. But I also know what it's like to have someone not believe you. Tell me again, are you sure you said no? Please tell Fatuma I'll be there at 4. Now, sitting in Fatuma's apartment, I look around and I'm also feeling a little awkward. I mean, Fatuma speaks about as much English as a woman from Walmart, and I speak about as much Somali. I mean, I know moose, it means banana, but that's about the extent of our conversation. So now I'm sitting here awkwardly by myself, quietly watching her daughter push a matchbox car across the floor in front of us, and I don't know what to say. And I start to wonder what she thinks of me. I mean, it can't be that that normal to have some stranger come over to your home and wait for hours on end. And maybe she's wondering why I'm wearing pants instead of a skirt like she is, or why I have sunglasses on my head instead of a scarf in winter. And I suddenly start to feel kind of defensive. And I'm like, I'm holding my hair back, Fatuma. I don't say that because I know what she's really thinking. Are you married? Do you have children? No, Fatuma, I'm not. I don't know if you know this, but in Maine, dating sucks. Near as I can tell since coming back, pretty much everybody's either married or single for a reason. But really what I'm wondering is, where are the voices? And this makes me think about an article I read in college about post-traumatic stress disorder, you know, PTSD. I remember how the author said that too often we throw around the words PTSD really casually when we talk about refugees, and many people don't suffer from it. But it doesn't mean that she doesn't. Maybe the voices Fatuma's hearing are real, if only to her. Maybe she hears the voices of the men in Mogadishu who came into her home and held her at gunpoint as they took her husband. Or maybe they hear the voices of the soldiers who came into the refugee camps and raped women at will, holding them as weapons of war. Or maybe she just hears the voices of the people in Atlanta. They used to sell drugs outside her door that encouraged her to move to Maine in the first place because she thought she'd be safer with her daughter. A state that boasts on its billboards, the way life should be. Do you know where that expression comes from? Apparently in the 1700s, when the Catholics started moving into Massachusetts, the Protestants got a little threatened. So they started to migrate north because the way life should be is Catholic free, or free of people like me. But I still don't hear any voices. And I start to wonder, oh, maybe she's just lonely. Maybe when she looks outside and sees the snow piling up to her windowsill, she wonders, how am I going to make friends in a country where we've traded our rocking chairs and our front porches for video rockers in front of our televisions? And maybe it's hard to come from a country where community is the main concern to the state of Maine, where we pride ourselves on being fiercely independent. But no matter what, I don't hear any voices. But she asked me to come and sit with her because she was frightened, and so we'll wait. Thanks. That's the opening scene. All right. Whew. That has been 10 years. All right. That's all I'm going to say pretty much today. I just want to give you a taste. I really now want to introduce my good guest. You don't have to do it yet. We're going to show a story. So I had to convince people to do the thing that I thought my director was crazy back in 2006, to stand up in front of hundreds of people. I mean, the Somerville show sold out with 800 people twice in a row. That is a hard, brave thing to do. And most of the people who did Suitcase Stories, like the television show, they never told a story before. But I basically told them my experience. I said, trust me, we're going to work on it together. It's not theater. That was more theater than what I do with storytelling. Storytelling should feel super organic, like you're telling your best friend. And I was really excited when we went to Needham, Massachusetts, and they recruited 6 people that were brave and willing to tell a story. And one of them is my friend Renaz, who is here. She was a resident who hadn't told storytelling, but she did have an arts background. She taught music. And crazy coincidence, when you also have a television show, you can sometimes be like, you did so well in Needham, you should tell it for the TV show. And she agreed, and I'm gonna let her say why. But we just recorded her story, and it just aired on national television. And what was really, really cool, because I like a good backstory, is it aired on her, she recorded it on her birthday. So let's watch Renaz's story.
Syria. I was born in Aleppo and moved to the United States with my 2 children. I work as a life insurance underwriter in Needham, Massachusetts.
Do you remember the first time that you ever shared a story on stage? And if so, what made you want to keep doing it?
Of course I do, because it was a life-changing experience. As a Muslim Kurdish woman, my first storytelling was in Needham, in the temple. And I was scared. It was mixed emotions because I've never done it before. I've never been in a temple before. And the outcome was amazing. I got tons of support after that. I had a family in Needham now. This place is home because of that experience. I met over 300 people, and it really changed my life.
What do you wish that people knew more about Syria and heard more about in the news about Syria?
I wish people would not have a single story. Like, Syria is not only one religion. It's not only one ethnicity. You know, there are Kurds, Armenian, Arabs, there are Muslims, Sunni, Shia, there is Christians, Catholic, Protestant, there is Aramis. And like the Kurds, they have equality between men and women. And it's something I don't think the Western world know a lot about. It's Christmas Eve, 1987. My 6-year-old self is too excited to sleep. Yes, we're Muslims, but we do celebrate Christmas. Like many other Muslim Syrian families, it's more associated with the New Year. We like the tree, Santa, and the gifts. It's Christmas morning, and I got a large Barbie doll house with pool and towels for Barbie and Ken, which was an expensive gift at the time. But my father was able to afford it. He owned a textile factory. Although I was born in Aleppo, I'm not Arab like most of the people in Syria. I am a Kurd from my father's side and my mother's side too. The percentage of the Kurdish people is 10 to 12%. Due to my father's profitable business, we lived very well in Syria. We owned a large house in a rich neighborhood where Kurds couldn't afford to live. I went to a private school and learned English there. I have a Kurdish name, Renaz, which means the one who knows the way. So people would ask me because of my Kurdish name, Renaz, are you a Kurd? When I say yes, they say, oh, you don't look like one, as a compliment, I guess. But I didn't take it as one. What they really meant is, you don't look poor like the rest. To be a Kurd in Syria means you cannot speak your language. The government for a long time put a strategic plan to erase and destroy our Kurdish identity. We were not allowed to speak the language. They prohibited the use and publications of books and other materials in Kurdish. They also changed the names of the Kurdish towns into Arabic. While other minorities, like Armenians, were able to speak their language, have their own schools, and congregate in their own clubs. Growing up, I was taken by Shakespeare, Jane Austen, Charles Dickens, to name but a few. So I studied English literature. One day, my father was driving me to college. I had an exam. It's called politics exam, where you go and praise the government and its achievements. My father told me, if you get any question about the Kurds, just skip that question. Here I am, in my exam room. I got the paper, and it was one essay question. What's your opinion about the latest protest conducted by the Kurds at the northern borders? I put the pen down, handed my paper, left college, walking and talking to myself. We are 35 million Kurds scattered around the world with no home. We're Muslims, Christians, Jews, and Yazidi Kurds. It's not a religion, it's a nationality. The government took every right from us, even the right to speak. Kurds had faced many atrocities and genocides, and it's still happening. But of course, if I put this down, I would have been imprisoned, tortured, and even killed, like many other Kurdish activists who dared to speak. The government didn't bring us in the media, not in the news or newspaper or any media outlet, but they managed to say every bad thing about the Jews. I remember one time going back home telling my mom, these Jewish people are terrible. Both my mom and dad corrected me and said, this is not true. Jewish people lived in Aleppo. It had a large community. They were our friends and neighbors. They had to leave their houses and businesses and their memories behind. The war started. My father lost his factory. So the family wealth that used to bring us protection does not exist anymore. Eventually, I had to leave. It's Christmas Eve again. My 32-year-old self is too excited to sleep. It's Christmas morning and I am at JFK, too tired and exhausted. The officer at the airport told me, "Ma'am, are these your kids?" When we get married in the Middle East, we don't change our last names, so my kids have different last names. So I told him, do you think I will fly for 14 hours with 2 kids that aren't mine? He smiled, but he still required an answer. So I said, yes. He stamped entry on my passport. And that was the best Christmas gift this Kurdish Muslim woman could ever get. But here I am again, as if the minority thing has to follow me like a curse. What a beautiful accent you have. Where are you from? Syria. Oh, you don't look like one. Well, I always wanted to say you don't look like Julia Roberts or Tom Cruise either, but I never said that, only once or twice. Aleppo was home. It was a beautiful city with the ancient citadel, the old market, the walk in the old market with the smell of the spices and the soap like a cleansing ritual. But it was safe because wherever you go, you meet people you know. So I wanted to create the same feeling in Connecticut. I joined the Moms Club, where I got tons of support. And I learned a lot of things, from the difference between public and charter school to know where to get the best strawberries, to make the best jam. I also learned that moms here talk about their mothers-in-law. The past 8 years were wonderful in the US. I only met kind and nice people, but unfortunately, my kids faced terrible insults in school. Like, do you belong to ISIS? How was life in a refugee camp? A life they never experienced. I have to remind myself, although these comments are really hurtful, but these kids are being misinformed by what they see on some news channels or social media or family members. But I faced the same thing in Syria. When I told my mom that the media is covering wrong information about the Kurds, but my mom always used to tell me, wear your insecurities as a crown. So can you see my crown? It says Muslim Kurdish single mom from Syria. I keep reminding my kids that being called a refugee is not an insult. It's a badge of courage, honor, and victory.
My name is Joe Pagliuca. I grew up in...
All right, we're doing a little bit of, I understand that BR has parked his car. He's safe and he's online with us. Yes, I get no. I'm gonna wait till BR pulls up. Oh. Does he have video or no? Okay, well, we're gonna take a few minutes to just take a break and let you talk. I'm gonna ask Renat some questions, and BR, if he joins us. I would like to just talk about like why we do this. And one of the things when I was designing Suitcase Stories, very similar to Stories from the Stage, is I always made sure we had the range of refugee experiences. And again, what I mean by that is not only someone who went through the journey, but those of us impacted. And sometimes I even had a woman walk up to me at the City Winery and she's like, why'd you have that white woman in the show? She wasn't an immigrant. She wasn't a person of color. And I said, because the audience includes white people who are not immigrants, and they need to hear the experiences to start to shift and know how to talk to their friends and loved ones about supporting immigrants. Now, we should put people who are refugees and immigrants first and foremost, but you want that array. It's one of the lessons that I've learned in the last, well, forever, working on this. But Renaz, can you tell me why you agreed to share your story? Because this was new for you.
Yeah, sure. Growing up in Aleppo, it felt like home because you have a community, you know people wherever you go. And I'm a very social person. And I think knowing people and having a community is very important, especially if you're a Muslim in a foreign country. So I agreed to do this story because I wanted to have a door to enter it to the community and meet people. And I don't regret it at all. And I want to keep doing it. Now I have a door to Tufts. Thank you.
It's not always how they feel before. I remember being backstage at the Somerville Theater, and the 6 of them were like, I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do it. And all of them were like, well, if you do it, I'll do it. And then they all got up and were fantastic.
Thank you so much.
How has it changed your life since?
Yeah, it was an intimidating experience. I've never been in a temple before, and this is one. And it was in the new town that I moved in. I was first in Connecticut, then I moved to Massachusetts, to Needham. It was my first year there. So I stood in the temple and I shared my story. And after the story, people lined up to talk to me. And ever since, I really have only 1 hour today to be here with you because I'm so busy. I'm so involved in the community. I'm with the Human Rights Committee, with the Immigration Task Force Committee, with the PTO, where we're so happy and involved in the community. We never spend any holiday alone. I have family. I have a Jewish family and Christian family and LGBTQ family, and we spend all like Christmas, Ramadan, Thanksgiving with our Needham family.
So besides what I talked about integration being really important, for me, this is really also a social networking activity. Because as we all know, that if you've grown up in this country, you have this huge network that helps you people get jobs, helps you get connections, helps you watch your children, and you need that in a community. And so that's one of our goals through any of the storytelling, is how to multiply that. And also because it's a deliberate way to help people's voices get out there. I am not in any delusion that all the movies made about Lewiston in the first decade afterwards, my play, the books written about it, which were many, were written by white US-born individuals because we had the resources, we had the connections, publicists wanted to hear from us, that I am waiting for someone who is Somali to write the story of Lewiston. I would love to read that. There was one goal was a great book about the soccer team winning the state championship, but she's also like me. She looks like me. I would really love to hear someone Somali tell Lewiston's story. But let's hear some questions that you might have for she and I, and BR is missing. We'll just go with us for now. We're having tech issues. Any questions about storytelling or for Renaz or I about our stories before we move on? Or your experience? Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I have a question about process.
Yep.
So what is the process from sort of the beginning?
Yep.
When you start to work on it?
Shall I?
Why don't you go first and I'll talk about what I do generally. Do you remember your process?
You reached out to me. Yeah.
So first somebody approaches, and then
Yeah.
how did you start crafting your story? What was your process?
It was the good questions you asked. Yeah. So I have a story because when you come here as an asylum seeker, political asylum seeker, you have to say why you're in fear of being persecuted back home. Why do you want to stay here? So it's my story. So I have it in my mind. Cheryl helped me putting it on paper and adding some details like the mother-in-law thing. A lot of people can relate. I really didn't have a bad mother-in-law, but still. But some people, and I think, I don't know, the jam making, maybe some kids get bullied in school, not only based on their religion or race, for their other things, maybe their appearances or something. So people can relate. I think that's what Cheryl taught me, that when people can relate to your story, this is a good thing. And also it's really important to me to share my story because I wanted people to see it, not what they see on TV, like this is us. Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things that you all know is that there's a lot of stories we see all the time written about immigration, right? There's the dramatized American dream story. It all works out. They get here, their life was difficult, they get here and everything's great. Or there's the really victim-centric story. Things are suffering, they're being, they have to have you help them. And I really get frustrated by those extremes. And so I'm always looking for, in any good story, whether about refugee resettlement or about love or anything, is relatability. And as I said from the beginning, there are 3 things you have to have in every story. There has to be conflict, there has to be meaning, and there has to be relatability and a really strong character. So what is the conflict in Renaz's story? How would you describe the conflict? And conflict can also be described as problem or challenge. What's the thing driving the story? Yes. Yeah, just change, like being somewhere different as somebody who's a different identity and different culture, right? Absolutely. What is relatable? What are some things that you each, even if you're not a Syrian immigrant, could relate to? Besides the mother-in-laws. What else did you relate to in her story? Yes, please. Right, the stereotyping of people. Yep, what else could you relate to? So the identity piece you could relate to. What else could you relate to? Regardless if you're a Syrian or immigrant. Yes. Yeah, discovering new culture, spices and delicious food, or finding home again is something that you have in common. Yep. Anybody else, something you can relate to? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. No, absolutely. So when I work with someone, whether it's Renaz or I'll use BR, I think he's probably not going to be part of this. We're going to just keep going. His car broke down on the highway. Oh, BR's here? BR, hi. Can you hear me? No, you're muted, BR. Hi, BR.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm so sorry about the car.
No, it's okay. Live happened.
Okay, BR, I'm going to come to you in a second and ask you why you wanted to share your story on Suitcase Stories and then also Stories from the Stage. But when I was working with BR, for example, and I get introduced to someone who's a refugee or immigrant, one of the things I remember is that particularly if you're a refugee, you have been asked about your story almost 20 times by State Department, by officers, resettlement agencies, by Resettlement Screen, by the health department, that's the story everybody asks. It's also the hardest story. It's like walking up to someone and be like, tell me about the worst time of your life. Like that is not an entree point. And actually it others us quite significantly. In Lewiston, it was not helpful to go to someone like my best friend, by the way, 20 years ago, my best friend said that I helped terrorists for a living. Like we had a wrestling in our relationship. Now I can tell you that she supports refugees, which is great, but it took a lot. If I came and told her a story about the worst day that a Somali lived through, it's just too foreign. And I literally mean foreign in terms of geography, but foreign in terms of personal experience. What we need to do is find the things we have in common and build stories around them. So BR, when I went with BR, he wanted to talk about his 20 years in a refugee camp. BR was 20 years in Kenya, from the age of 3 months old till 21, right? I make 20 years. When he was there, I said he was going to tell the whole story. I was like, that's too big. Pick one day in the refugee camp. Pick one encounter. Start with the small, because it's the everyday that we have more in common with. It's the mother-in-laws. It's the fears you're not going to succeed at school. It's the bad day at work. That's what we need to find in common with each other. BR, why did you decide to share your story originally?
I wanted to share my story because I feel like there is, we tend to not know people until we listen to them. So oftentimes there is a lot of things we can relate to as human beings, but until we share our stories, we cannot find that common ground.
Thank you, BR. BR, can you not tell your full story, but can you tell what your first story was about that you shared? Not the full version, but like in a sentence or two?
The first story?
Yeah, the one you told originally 4 years ago.
Do you want 1 or 2 sentences and from any line?
Well, a short description of it.
So it's basically about my life experience in the refugee camp and how I was a dreamer and having to dream every day of a better life. And in the refugee camp, basically, you don't have the opportunity to pursue your dreams. But then when you see, you are isolated. You don't know any other world outside the refugee camps. So, but when most of our people, the refugees, started traveling to the United States, Canada, Australia, they gave us hope. And then from then we started dreaming of a better tomorrow.
Right. So for him, one of the connections was all of us, our aspirations, our dreams. But the part of the first story BR did 4 years ago that really, BR, by the way, has traveled with me to assemblies, he does school assemblies, and students are always really captured by him. And he talks about education. What was education like in a camp? But the moment that's really pivotal in his piece is about the day he found out what the word refugee was, because he never learned the word because he was one. And so suddenly a teacher is using this word and he's like, well, what is that? And they're like, it's you. And it's for when he crafts the story, it's really beautiful because people like myself and others who might have grown up in this country that don't also had that moment of hearing about a refugee for the first time. And what is this? And so it's this sort of bridging story that I really love that he does. So when I work with someone, what we first do is we spend 50% of our time figuring out what story to tell, right? And the things that I focus on not only are like find the small, focus on the individual, but also think about the stories that aren't told currently. There are so many immigration stories that we hear often, but there's the stuff we don't. And one of the ways I get there is how I started with all of you when I said, what are those indicators of integration? You came up with 13 different topics. You could tell a health story. You could tell an employment story. You could tell a housing story. That means that you have many stories in your toolbox. I mean, BR now is working on his next story, and I hope we have time to do this. We do still, right? Okay, great. BR, you are a brave guy. In a second, BR is going to share a story that I haven't even heard. So you're going to see how coaching works a little bit. And what I'm going to ask you to do as you listen to his story, BR, I'm going to give you a 1-minute warning because we're time. So to give you an idea, is I want you to think about what you connected with in his story, because that's what our goal is. Some stories can be just entertaining for entertainment's sake, but I'm really interested in focus and book stories about connection. So what could you connect with? What did you want to hear more about in the story? I've got 3 questions. And what did you not need as much information? Like there's the editing process, right? When I was doing my play, I would come in and folks, I never wrote that play down. All I did was come 2 nights a week and talk at my director nonstop. And the only time I ended up writing it down was when I had to have it transcribed to send it to that competition in New York City. And what I would do is just tell him stories. And he would politely say to me, that part was really interesting. I didn't need as much about that. You could use that for another show. All right, BR, I'm sorry you're doing this on the side of the road, but are you all set to tell us a story?
Yes, I am.
Okay, let me get my pen because I have not heard it, folks. This is a first. We're going to do this together. I wanted to have that in the moment experience like you all are having. All right, so again, we're going to be, what could we relate to? What did we want to hear more about? And what did you need not as much information on? All right, BR, go ahead.
At 17, I was ready for the biggest moment of my life, to sit for my national examination in Kenya. But in Kenya, for you to do your examination, you need your birth certificate. But unfortunately, for a lot of refugees, we do not have the birth certificate. So then I make a call to my uncle because I was so happy to do my examination. And he told me, if you go to the Sudan embassy, they will be able to help you get your birth certificate. So I went to the Sudan embassy, but I didn't know where it was located. I just asked for direction. And while I was on my way to the Sudan embassy, I knew the city where it was located in, but I didn't know precisely where it was located. So I started asking people for location. I asked about 15 people, but a lot of them didn't know where Sudan embassy was located. So I keep moving and keep going and keep going. While I was like 5 minutes away from the embassy, the young man told me, if you keep going straight, the embassy is 5 minutes away. So while I was going to the embassy, there was a woman and I didn't notice she was following me. She stopped me and she said, "Son, are you looking for financial assistance?" And I was like, "No, I'm actually looking for Sudan embassy. I just don't know where it was located." And then she told me, "Okay, I can take you there." She took me to the embassy, but on our way to the embassy, she told me something very important. She told me, "I stopped you because I'm a mother first before I'm anything." She said, "If I see a child on the street, as a mother, I feel obligated to help that child. And that was the reason I helped you. I thought perhaps you were homeless." A year later, I was relocated to the United States of America. Coming to the US, I enrolled in college. While I was going to McDonald's to buy coffee and breakfast, I had another encounter, but this time I wasn't directly involved. There was a young man, a homeless person standing on the street asking for change. And then he asked this young lady for change. But the young lady was so rude to the young man. He said, "You thug, go find a job. Don't be lazy. If you were a drug addict, you wouldn't be on the street." But then that took me back to 10 years ago when a woman stopped me on the street thinking I was homeless, and the way she treated me versus the way this young woman treated this young man. And I came to a realization that one thing we have in common, we are all human beings. And regardless of our present condition, we should learn to treat people with respect, dignity, and humility, because table can turn tomorrow. And we don't know why those people are on the street. We don't know why those people are homeless. We don't know why those people are there. Then I talked to the young man, and he told me he is homeless, not because he's not looking for a job, but he is homeless because of the mistakes that he made when he was young, while he was in high school, and nobody is willing to give him employment. So the point of my story today is that we should learn to respect one another. We should learn to treat people with respect, dignity, because those homeless people, they are human first before they are anything. Yes, they might be homeless, but one thing we all have in common is that we are human. Thank you.
Woo! Okay. 100% of the people I work with do not have to tell their story to me for the first time in a broken down car over Zoom in front of 40 people. So thank you, BR. BR, just for your reference, that was 3 minutes and 45 seconds. So you have 7 minutes. And this is very common. When I work with people for the first time, they either are like, "That was 7 minutes, right?" I'm like, "That was 2." Or they go 20. So this is actually a good situation because he has 7 minutes on television. So there's plenty of things that we can add here. But let's start with those 3 critical questions first. What is something actually, no, let's do the ones I gave to you. Sorry. The first question was, what could you relate to in BR's story? And BR, since you're in a car, I'm gonna take notes for you as we edit. What could you relate to? Yes.
Being lost somewhere and asking for help and
Yeah.
hoping somebody will be nice.
Being lost somewhere. What else? Observing someone with a homeless person. Yep. I think we probably all have had that experience, right? What else? Yes, please. Right. Yeah, stereotypes, assumptions of what's going on. Absolutely. Both of the people of us and we had of others. Absolutely. Was yours the same? Yeah. Was that a hand? Yes. I don't think it's on.
Hello. Okay. The stress of an exam and the importance of it.
Right. The stress of exam, the importance of also the paperwork, right? Those feelings. Yep. Something else?
The mother that was following him.
The mother.
And
Tell me more. What could you relate to?
I'm from Ethiopia. And when you see a child on the road, and if you relate, as a mother, you just don't dismiss.
Beautiful.
You inquire, you ask.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So, yeah.
And that might not be the same everywhere, right? That's beautiful. Thank you. Anybody else and you can relate to? Yes, please.
Being on the receiving end of random act of kindness versus being on the receiving end of a random act of rudeness.
Right, right. VR doesn't have to be a refugee to tell this story. He doesn't. His background does not need to be a refugee. I think because you're a refugee, it impacts it, right? But this story is an example where I could put him on the television show and be like, tell your refugee story, right? But I was actually like, VR, can you think of a story? So the process that got us here today is earlier this week, we were talking about the choices of stories he has in his, in his life. And I asked him, can you find some stories that other people who are not refugees could relate to? And he came up with a couple, and we landed on this one because I saw the universal appeal that all of us have been on the street with somebody and either not known what to do ourselves or reacted to other people. So I thought you did that very well. I think the relatability there is VR is great. All right, what did you want more of that VR did not share? Because he's got 3.5 more minutes. What additional information do you want more of? Yes.
The woman that philosophy about caring for children, the need to emphasize the importance of that in the culture, not a common thing, or well, can be a common thing within our American culture, and not. So that, and did he ever get? Well, I'm hoping he got his birth certificate.
You got your birth certificate, correct, VR?
Yes, I did.
Right. How was the exam?
It was good. It was good. I did pass.
Oh, great. Okay.
That one random act of kindness and that philosophy of culture.
Yep.
Has helped him achieve his goals.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
Stating that, like honoring that human interaction led to his success.
Great. What else? What are some other things you wanted more about? Okay.
I'm good. Thank you. Fabulous story. I guess I wanted a little bit more about the place.
Hmm?
At both times, right?
Mhm.
The where he was, what was around him, context, and
Yep.
similarly with the story about how badly the homeless man was treated here.
Great. So some more about place VR. Yes.
Oh, you want me to go into that?
Not now. I'm gonna
Okay.
share all these notes with you later. In the interest of time, we're getting great feedback.
Am I on?
Yep.
More about the young man who was homeless, rather than telling us he is important and he has dignity and he's human, just tell us more of his story and we'll reach that conclusion ourselves, I think.
Yeah, VR, I'm going to talk to you about this. One thing I love working with VR is he is so good at the hardest thing in storytelling, which is figuring out what your story is about. Like that is the time I spend the most with people, is that people have some interesting thing happen, but if you have not made meaning of it for yourself, it's not going to have the same impact. So VR is consistently amazing at that. But VR, I would say you gave away your meaning too quickly. You gave it away halfway through the story. The meaning should be in the last minute. And all you need to do, in my opinion, is switch. You introduce the meaning and then you went to your interaction with that man. If you had gone to the man, had that interaction, we would have seen it and you would have had to say less. So that's something to say. You want to stay in storytelling. It's different than a speech. You want to stay in the story as much as you can. What I mean by is in the place, in the action, in the dialogue, so that the meaning stands on its own at the end. You can still do a summary, but, and I'm going to pick on you because we're good friends. You never have to say the lesson of this story is, or the moral of my story. If it's told well, it will radiate. But we'll get to that. But VR, you're doing great. Other things you wanted more about? Yes.
I loved hearing your story and like the parallels that you're drawing. And sorry, I'm here.
Oh.
I'm here, just
So weird.
coming
I
out
can
of
see
the
mic.
ether.
Okay. Yes.
But also like the parallel of like asking for help and the actual help that you're receiving not matching what you're asking for as well. I think would be just an interesting thing to dig into.
I agree. And I said to VR when we were talking the other day, I said, you do need to talk about being a refugee because, I said to him, I'm curious, having lived a refugee life where you've had to depend so much on international assistance and food assistance, which he tells in his other story, how does it reflect or change your perception of other people in help? So we're going to add a little bit more of that background again, and that's where you can do education and storytelling. Like again, the reason I wanted to do the timeline of my story compared to my theater piece with you was to show that for the first 10 years of my life, I did the timeline thing. I traveled around the country. Here's what happened. Here's what happened. Here's what happened. Here's what happened. But that doesn't really mean as much as how did you feel about what happened? What were you wrestling with internally? What's that internal dialogue? So BR, I want to hear a little bit more of your internal dialogue. Like, did you think about helping him? Like, what were you thinking as you approached him? Because we want some tension in that conflict moment of like, well, so I decide to go up to him, and I'm not sure what he's going to say to me, particularly maybe even also because you're in Lowell, right? What was the race of the gentleman you were talking to? Do you remember? Was he?
Yes.
Was he white?
Yes.
Right. So that parallel, that difference, whether that, like, what was your interaction there? Did you think he'd be welcoming? Lowell's a very diverse place. Maybe it's normal, but in Lewiston, if you had walked up to somebody, it would be a very different encounter. Other things you wanted more of?
So after this lesson kind of occurred to you in the midst of this interaction with him, maybe how that carried through afterwards, some impacts from this interaction.
That's a great point. So we might be able to get some of that in. How does it transform you today? It's very hard in 7 minutes to get all of that. So the question was, what we often do for the TV show, if they can't get it in because it sacrifices those places and those moments, we have that interview portion. And so we say, like, why are you telling this story? And they can do because since then, I navigate the world a certain way. Great. What did you want less of? Was there anything you were like, I didn't need this so much, or is there anything you would edit or take out?
I think for me, maybe the part that you talk about, the way that you get lost and you're trying to find the Sudan embassy. I feel like that part, it's important, but I feel like, because when I hear the story, I thought that would be a really critical point, something with the embassy. But I think that women come out to you and the help that you got was the highlight of the story, and also what happens in the US after. So maybe that piece can be shortened a little bit, but I like the story.
I'm 100% in agreement. So I would say the beginning, I love when you start a story, you can either do two sort of directions. You can do the quick, let me give you some background on who I am and how I got to this place, or you can start in the moment. If you're new to storytelling, start in the moment. It's easier and more succinct. And he does that really well, but I think you said more than you needed to. Like, I was like, all right, he's going to the embassy, he has a reason. The woman's more important. Can you describe the woman to us a little bit, BR, right now? Like, and the scene, a little bit more of the scene?
Right now?
Yeah, sure.
So she was a Kenyan by nationality. She was tall. I think that's the only description. Kind, of course, and very caring. I think pretty much.
She was kidding. All right, we're going to work on that. I want to know, is she tall, short, young, older? Is she a grandmother type figure? Is she a new mom? Those are things that I would ask. Okay. So coaching for storytelling is just being curious. And if you're getting into storytelling and if you want to see any of this stuff, you can go to Stories to the Stage. I do a bunch of webinars about how to tell stories. It's about the real specifics. It's the jam. It's what the man looks like sitting down, because otherwise, if you don't tell people what it is, we're going to come up with our own conclusions in our own minds and create our own movies, right? Any final thoughts that you would give BR on his story? Anything that you're like, I can't wait to see it. I hope I hear this or this change in the next version.
One thing that occurred to me while he was telling the story is whether he had any negative reaction to this stranger coming up to him and asking him if he needed financial assistance.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other thing with storytelling is you have to make yourself relatable as the narrator in your story. You have to be relatable. And what I mean by that is we all have strengths and we all have weaknesses. We all have fears and we all have hopes. You can't be the hero in your story and good all the time. You also have to have insecurities and worries or fallible moments, right? Like, I'm telling off Fatuma in my story. I'm like, hey, lady, that's my internal dialogue. I don't actually behave that way, but I needed a moment for you to be like, all right, she's not like super do-gooder. She has her own insecurities. BR, we're going to have to hear from you a little bit in order to really understand the impact that experience had on you. some of your own wrestling, right? When do you wrestle with this? Either in Kenya or in this country, or how experiences you've had to make yourself most relatable. All right, that is very hard to do, BR. I'm so grateful for you to make this happen today. Thank you. I made a very quick list, so BR and I will talk later. Here's what I would say if I was like, he has to go on stage right now. The beginning needs to be tighter. There needs to be more about both women and the man, but just personality things. Personality, appearances, I want to see them, and then I would move the meaning to the end. But that's actually a very good start to a story, and I would say it's even like halfway there. And I know he's going to do a phenomenal job, and you all can see it in June. So I'll make sure that we get Refugees in Town to share it in the future. All right, we have like 8 minutes, and this didn't work out quite the timing I was hoping because of the travel stuff. But I want to take 8 minutes to do one last thing because I think it's really important. Can you go to the last slide with the questions? I said this was your time to talk, and I feel like we didn't get as much time. Go before that. Yeah. We're going to do a pair thing really quickly because I think it's really important. As I've said all along, the stories you choose to tell influence how other people see the world. And 50% of the work I do with people is helping them choose the right story. So I have endless prompts I give to people, but I want you to take a second and turn to your partner and perhaps tell the 2-minute version on one of these. The event that inspired me to advocate for refugees. Is it like me with my mother calling me overnight and saying our city was being invaded by refugees? Or was it the day that someone called me about a thesis? Whatever your day is, what was that critical moment? Or you traveled like Renaz someplace and you had a cross-cultural experience that will never leave you, ever. Mine was I was in Togo. I was pulled out of line at the passport station. I thought I was in all kinds of trouble. They looked like I was in trouble. They took me a room in the back of the place. I thought this was it. I was like, oh God, this is every bad movie I've ever seen. Turned out they took me out of line because it was my birthday and they saw it on the passport and they were getting the staff together to wish me and sing me happy birthday. I tell that story a lot in Maine because I play into every stereotype, every fear of Africa and people that are Black. I do the whole thing. And I relate myself to them. And then I say that this is what happened. And I'm just as guilty. I shouldn't have been as afraid as I was in that moment because I grew up in a place. And the third one is, when did the refugee crisis change the way you perceive yourself or society? All right, I really want to do this. I'm sorry if it breaks into your thing. We're going to do this really quickly. So turn to your partner, the 2-minute version of one of these, all right? You guys are, yeah, thanks. I can't believe that was insane. You guys were so nice to do all that. All right. I'm so sorry. We were going to have more time, but I have to interrupt because it's coffee break time. These will be posted, I think, with the presentation. You can go back. There's slides that had a summary of like the lessons and also the like best tips on storytelling. But I'm going to pull up the last two slides. So when I proposed that Suitcase Stories series, the reason it's called Suitcase Stories is because of a suitcase moment. So when I talk about storytelling, this is a 15 minutes from my life, only 15 minutes. And what happened was when I finally went to Kenya, after 10 years later, I finally got there to see where Somalis lived in the camps and in the neighborhoods before they came to Lewiston. I went to the IOM Departure Center to accompany a refugee who was being resettled to Seattle. And when I walked into the room, if you've never been to IOM, as people are getting on the buses, they line up all the suitcases and they have their names and their case numbers and their destination. And the fourth suitcase in there said Lewiston, Maine. In my first time, and I lost it, as you can imagine. And I started screaming as a white woman, and I was like, whose bag? And of course, no one wants to claim the bag from the screaming white woman. But finally, I got people calmed down, and we explained, and finally this came over, and the woman on the left, it was her bag with her 3 sons. And the crazy thing about that is she was reuniting after 5 years with a man that they'd been separated because of the refugee situation. And her husband was my first coworker. Insane storytelling, and that's what the story is. And so my story I tell is all about just separation and connection in these unexpected ways. The world is smaller than we think, and that's them there 2 years later, or 4 years later, and that's her husband, who's my friend. So I want to summarize to remind you. So here's where the big takeaways. Number one is that we have to find ways to connect people, and whether that's through storytelling or whatever you love, creating spaces and inviting people into it. We need to build social connections so we can deal with all and support all these other indicators. If you do get excited about storytelling, the 3 most important things, again, I'm going to keep saying them to drive them home. It's really the magic equation: meaning, character, and conflict. And conflict can be internal or external. And the final thing is, people are like, how'd you get all these people to tell their stories? Like that's so, like, how'd you do that? It's very simple. You ask. Like, you authentically ask and say, I'm curious, but you don't start with the tell me the worst thing that ever happened to you. Tell me the best thing that ever happened to you. Tell me what brings you joy. Tell me when you struggled in this community, and then give an example where you have, because it's through that that people have the confidence to share their story and then support them. Someone said, how do I do this? I sit and I talk to people for at least an hour before we even choose the story. And then when we choose the story, Guess what? We don't write it. Most of the people I work with never write them down. They write an outline and they just talk because you've lived it. You can't get it wrong. You just need to structure it. So thank you for letting me spend time with you this morning. Thanks for the flexibility. Thanks for the team for coordinating a storyteller from a car on a highway. That's amazing. And have a great afternoon and tell a lot of stories. Thanks.